that would be great. We have two presenters with us tonight that are going to give you their impressions of the Tokyo Paralympics. We're very fortunate in Canada with having two WPA ITOs in our country. And not only are we fortunate to have two ITOs in the country, both of them went to the Tokyo 2020 Paralympics. So they're going to give you an up close and personal view of their impressions and their viewpoint of the Tokyo Olympics. So first on our docket is Louise Busquez, who happens to reside in Alberta. Oh, the host has muted me once again. She's a WPA ITO. And Louise, take it away with your impressions of Tokyo.
Okay, so a little bit of background. This was my first Paralympics, and from my recollection, it is my first event in a major stadium. So yeah, I was over the moon with the whole thing. And now, why won't it? There we go. Fly away, birdie. So, Olympic Stadium. Yeah, for me, I was not prepared for the feeling of walking into a huge stadium. It just, I'm sure I stood there with my mouth open. It was just so cool. I don't know what else I can say. So national and international officials, there was, I think, 237 national officials there. And most of these officials did the Olympics and the Paralympics. So they were a well-oiled machine. So on the first day, we did it. After that meeting there, we did a tour of the facilities. Oh, this is one of the throws crew. The officials are in red and the volunteers are in blue. One interesting thing that I didn't notice till afterwards is there was very few female officials. Don't know a reason. These are the officials from the call rooms. A tie-down crew, yes. Believe it or not, the maximum that there was in the circle at one time was 13. I'm not quite sure why we needed so many, but you know what? They got the job done. Again, don't usually need 5 people to set a block, but you know, again. And these volunteers were just everywhere, including vacuuming the track before the start of the event. So these programmers were out there programming these implement retrievers, and these weren't remote controlled. They were robotic, and they used GPS. So they would go out before the event to put their markers down for GPS, and so it's mesmerizing watching these things. These were 2 cameras, obviously mainly geared for when there would have been spectators there. But so you looked at one and the other one took your picture, it printed it out right there, it gave you a QR code, then you can download it later and put whatever little logos you want on it. Again, Japan would have all that technology, even more technology. These little creatures were just everywhere, up on the spectator level. So as ITOs, we don't really represent our country. We're neutral, kind of like Switzerland, but it is pretty cool to be able to see your flag. And we cover for each other if possible, so that if your country's getting a medal, we let each other go watch. Oh yeah, one of the special moments for some of there was like a sweep of the medals by, when the guy from Belgium, this was pretty cool. I was up in the media stands umpiring when this event was on. His first throw was his record-setting and winning foot. Backstage, most people can't go back. No photographers would ever get to be there before the flag goes out. So it was pretty cool to be there watching the flag get flown, and even more, as much as it's cool as to see your flag, it's even cooler to hear the national anthem. That was Brent's silver from the same day. Wasn't many spectators. Those were all coaches, fellow athletes. Again, this was a no photographer zone, but I just said to the volunteer, I says, is it okay if I take a picture? Oh yeah, okay. So I quick took a picture and I left. So we only had 2 nights that we had to wear our formal uniforms. So it was, when we wore them, it was a big picture night. That's a self-explanatory picture. I don't need to say more about that. So on the very last day was the marathon, which was special because normally you would have to quarantine for 2 weeks when you go into Japan, but we were deemed necessary for the event, so they waived our quarantine, but the only place we could go was to the stadium. And then for the marathon, they bussed us out to our checkpoints and then bussed us back. So I was the furthest out, and in my opinion, I got the coolest spots. I got some history. The tower in the back there is the, remember it? The Sky Tree. This is one of the lead cars, very kind of futuristic. Oh, and we thought there were so many people at, when there was the stadium, the number of volunteers and police officers that were lined the route for the marathon was mind-boggling. In this picture alone, there was 8. And at every intersection, there was a bus or 2 buses, and those are police buses. Not quite sure why the police need that many buses, but yeah, there was vending machines everywhere you looked. And that was just when the athletes were coming around. This was one of the officials from the Czech Republic and from Japan, and she was pretty excited to get to have breakfast at Tiffany's. This is one of the water stations, and this building, I don't know what, I can't explain what that building was. Pretty cool. Oh, this was one of my highlights. So after the race passed us, we get on the bus, and so basically we're following the athletes back to the stadium because that's where it ended, and discovered that if you waved at these people who are still watching everything go by, they waved back. So that was my entertainment for 2 hours. And as the other officials got on the bus, they had fun too, just waving to all the people. We felt like celebrities. And so what's the usual discussion by officials at a meet? Is food, of course. I always say, long as they give me food or chocolate and Coca-Cola, I'm happy. And yeah, it was there in abundance. And this was an arizushi. It's a Japanese food, and it has always been one of my favorites. So I was lucky that I didn't have a permanent assignment, so I got to experience several areas. And then I had, a few sessions off, and so then I would go visit the other places and take pictures and stuff like that. So I had quite a few sessions in seated throws, and I think only one in ambulatory. So yeah, just like a kid in the candy shop was going to the equipment room, cool stuff. So yeah, again, it's all kind of self-explanatory, but just kind of fun to look at. The EDMs, the facilities people were amazing. I mean, I never put it together that they do the opening ceremonies, and there's usually a day before athletics start because they have to convert the whole stadium from a stage back into a competition area. And then the moment that marathon was done, actually even before the marathon was done, they're already ripping out the grass and getting ready to get it ready for the closing ceremonies. So this cage was pretty cool. It being on wheels, it transported so easily. So there you can see it is on the far end of the stadium. And 15 minutes later, there it is at the other end. I wish I would have, I mean, I couldn't have videoed all, but it was just so cool to watch. So this is a picture of the rails that they used. They looked pretty hefty, but in essence, they didn't work that well. Yeah, they had great big hooks, so and no matter what type, sort of straps you used, they worked well to get them in the hooks, but they had a lot of give to them. They weren't as good as what we use, in my opinion. So throwing frame inspection, this was probably a quarter of what we did the pre-check on, and the pre-check wasn't mandatory, so not all the chairs came in for pre-check. There's just a few of the examples of unique ones that we saw. This was by far the coolest with the signage that they put on the bottom of this chair. So the two most common problems we had with the frames was the padding was too thick, either on various places, and the other problem was that it was unlevel. That was interesting, and I didn't take a picture of it. So communication is obviously a problem quite often at these events. So to show that it was unlevel, the national guy would take two pieces of tape and he would put one and he'd say, this side is 74 and this side is 75, to show them that, you know, which side is higher and that they could figure out that it was unlevel. So the padding too thick was easy to solve because we just gave them packing tape and they wrapped it till it got down to the right thickness. The being unlevel was a little bit more tricky, and depending on exactly how the chair worked, there was different things that we did, but what I thought the most ingenious was this. It doesn't show very well, but what we did is, we told them to do it, and they taped water bottle caps to the bottom of their chairs. It just gave it that extra bit of height to make it level. Now, if it had been too high, that wouldn't have worked, but yeah, worked well. I never got to see how that stood up after you got some of those throwers on there, but got it through inspection. Oh, this is, I call this guy the gatekeeper. He called himself the gatekeeper. So he worked the call room for the Olympics and the Paralympics. So every athlete for every event that went in there, he let in there. I just thought that was a cool touch. So athletes came to call room 1, and then from there they go to call room 2. But this is where they had to go. It was quite the little trek. Now, for the ambulatory one, for most of the ambulatory ones, that was fine, but not so easy for some. So they had a cute little name for these vehicles. I don't remember what they're called, but so then the athletes could go down there and be transported. So that's me and the official from Australia checking it out, and the guy driving I called him Mr. Enthusiasm. That's no other way to describe him than enthusiastic. So yeah, you see the tables, but you don't realize what's behind them. And I thought this shelf underneath it was pretty cool. I mean, it was just perfect. They put their little bags in there or whatever you needed to put in there. It was just, again, I like taking pictures of all the cool things I see. So how many straps do you need to tie down? Apparently a lot. This was a bit overkill. This was a special athlete. So I had to put this in again. This is Greg on his 3rd attempt, but look at the countdown clock is what I wanted to show. He kind of forgot that he had it. I'm not sure what exactly happened. He didn't realize he was up next to throw, but he got it in time. These being that it's open at the top of the stadium, the flocks of birds would come in. And I was on my way out to the fields, to the landing area, and these birds probably circled me 3 times on my way out there. It was kind of reminded me of the snowbirds in flight, but yeah, quite disconcerting. This was the other cool thing. This was their sponge for picking up water. So you can see here that it's going and it's picking up, and it did a phenomenal job of picking up the water. So once this got full, they went over the drain, put that down, and the water out. Worked cool. Oh, yes, me being intrigued by different things is, I never did find out what this little thing was. I called it rat door so the rats could escape. And then I don't even know why I had to put that in. Oh, so a lot of the officials had to go home, go to quarantine. Us from Canada didn't have to, but this is what the one guy, this was the quarantine he had to go through. So yeah, we didn't really feel sorry for him that he had to spend 2 weeks there. That's about it that I have.
Are there any questions for Louise? We'll take a few questions right now directly from Louise's presentation, and David and Louise are going to stay with us, and if you think of more questions, you can ask then. Unmute yourself, and if you've got a question, and ask away. We will let you consider your questions or think of any questions that you have. And we have another presenter with us tonight, and that is David Weicker, who resides in BC. He is also a WPA ITO. And this, I believe, is his second Olympics. So he has some experience there, and he will give you his impressions of his experiences in Tokyo. So David, if you want to start sharing your screen, you can go ahead.
It's not being shared. You can't see it right now?
No.
Okay, then I'll have to back out because I thought it was showing.
Oh, okay.
I've got you now, Dave.
Sorry?
You're on the screen now.
Okay, so
But
the
is his presentation.
First thing I want to say is it's Tokyo 2020, but it was held in 2021. And that, I think we all know the reason for that, which is why some people are wearing masks even today.
I'm not seeing the presentation.
I'm sorry?
I don't see the presentation.
Okay,
Same for me.
I'll try one more time.
Yeah.
Can you see it all now?
David,
Yeah,
I can see it now.
Okay. So again, it was the 2020 Olympics or Paralympic Games, but they were held in 2021. And this is a picture of our hotel, and the way we got to the stadium, which was across the street. We basically just walked up this way to the other side of this little island of greenery, and then down this pathway. And then there were a bunch of people ready to take our temperature and to escort us through the airport type screening zone. Here are some of the colleagues. As Louise pointed out, there were 237 national technical officials, and there were 17 international technical officials. And this is, again, a picture like Louise of all of us wearing our dress blues. A look at the stadium. So this is the first look at the stadium, the outside view. And then this is the inside, first look at the inside view of the stadium. And it looks like all the seats are full, but that's just the way they designed the stadium and the seating in the stadium. So as you get closer, you can see they aren't people, they're just colored seats. So there were two video rooms that I would like to emphasize. One is the video adjudication room, which is where Ben and I think I have a picture of Ben a little bit later. Ben and I worked in there, and then there was and it was air conditioned, as you can well imagine. And then there was the jury of appeal video room, and that's where teams could view video at the bequest or behest of the secretary of the jury of appeal, Albin Renteria he's from Colombia, but he works for World Para Athletics. So the national federations could review video before deciding to go to appeal or not. And this is an example of what the video room looks like. Like, we get this many feeds. This is how many are possible for essentially every event. And you can see on the right-hand side, there's two people, one sitting down and one standing up. Amy sitting and Catherine standing, and we called them the brains of the organization, but they weren't really the brains. The brains were all these cables. And this is why it had to be air conditioned. So what we were looking for, and again, I'll just go back one slide or a couple of slides. You can see Ben here. The track is on the left, field is on the right. So Ben would be watching field events, and I was doing track, so I would be watching the track events. And these screens could be split into 4 at any time. The screen in the middle that I'm pointing to right now is the host broadcast feed that you would see on TV. So you wouldn't see the 4 screens split like we would, but that's what we did. And Ben would help by watching track events, and I would help Ben by watching field events at each time. So what we looked for, for video referee, track we look at proactively. And so we were looking at guide pushing, pulling, or propelling, proper use of tethers, guide exchanges, assistance that contravenes the rules, running or wheeling out of lane, cutting in too early at the brake line, taking drinks from other than the drink stations in the marathon, and relay passes and starting in the zone, among other things. For the field, we were looking at again, reactively. And what I mean by that is officially, we react by waiting for a field referee to ask us something or tell us what they want us to look at. We did look at implement landings and measurement, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. We looked at proper throwing technique. We looked at lifting or loss of contact in seated throws. And we looked at proper takeoff and horizontal jumps, among other things. So what we found that others didn't, you can see a tether in the hand of the guy on the athlete on the right, but no tether in the athlete or the guide runner on the left. And they have to be tethered right through to the finish line. You can also see that this guy went just a little bit too far over onto the line, and therefore he ended up being disqualified. And then you can see this is in the seated throws. This is a holding bar that appears to be illegal because it appears to have 2 pieces that are fused together. And it's supposed to be one single piece that's straight. You saw this picture from Louise. How many starter's assistants does it take to set the starting blocks for an athlete? And in this case, they used 5 plus or 4 plus 2 supervisors. This is an example of our daily report form. And so you can see the date, the session number, the time that the event started, whether it was a track event or a field event, what event it was, the gender of the athletes, whether it was a final, a semifinal, or if it was a heat. And if it was a heat, then or a group, then we would indicate which heat it was, and then a description of what the problem was that we saw. So for everyone that we had recorded in all of the days, there would be a video coverage of that, and we're waiting to get the videos from there. The video was done by Hawkeye, and it was organized for us using host broadcast cameras, and the cameras were actually pretty good this time. They were better than Rio and better than the World Championships in 2019 in Dubai. Better because there were more cameras that were available or made available to us, and they weren't just following the lead pack as they sometimes or often do. What we also found very unusual was a marriage proposal after a T11, which is a blind. You can see the athletes are all wearing eye masks. It was a T11 200-meter race, and one of the guides of one of the athletes proposed to the athlete after the event. So that was the first time I've ever seen a marriage proposal at a track meet. And maybe some of you have seen one before. So what we found that others didn't, in seated discus and ambulant throws, marking of throws was not great, but nobody noticed or said anything. And by that, I mean, there was one case where the mark of the throw was about a meter off, and that could have made the difference between a bronze and a silver medal. But the coach wasn't looking and the athlete wasn't looking, so they didn't have any concern over it. And I'm sorry, I'm a little bit biased in this next statement. It was a Canadian athlete where the mark was way off. And there were lots of events where the marking was way off. And we had video of all of them. And we ended up having a meeting with the technical delegates to discuss what we should do about the marking. And the marking got better on the next day, but then it went back to poor the following day. So closing ceremonies, you saw a couple of really good pictures from Louise, so I won't spend much time on those. COVID precautions. In the dining room at the hotel, there was plexiglass between you and anybody you were sitting with. And this is a friend of mine from Colorado. He's also an ITO, Jerry Clayton, and some of you may know him because Jerry and I do presentations. And one presentation we've already done and are refining is a presentation on seated throwing. And I've offered to do that with Jerry for your group of throws referees or officials. Down here, this is also COVID precautions. Every day we had to do what's called a spit test or a saliva test. And we had to put so much saliva in a test tube and mark it by, and then send the information through our app on our phones. And you all had to, everybody has to have a smartphone with an app that works. And Jane, when she does her presentation, will talk about her having to buy a new phone because her old phone wouldn't support the apps. We also had to wear masks every day, had our temperature checked virtually everywhere, and the spit tests, as I mentioned already. So that is it for me. And like Louise, I'm happy to take any questions that you might have.
Dave?
Thank you.
Well, go
Oh,
ahead,
good.
Jane.
Daryl, go ahead.
I was just had a question. I thought of one for Louise to start off with. You there, Louise?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. I wondered how many circles were in use at any one time? Was it just the, like one for ambulatory and one for seated at any one time?
Oh, no, it's like a three-ring circus. Quite often there was two seated at a time, and at times there would also have been two ambulatory, depending on what they were throwing. And I mean, it varied from day to day, session to session, but at the most there would have been 4 circles going.
Because I just saw that there was just the one cage for seated, but they had another one as well.
But we had shot put too. We don't need a cage for shot.
Okay. And how were the throws conducted? Did they
wouldn't
get
have been-
3? Sorry,
No.
Louise?
There were only 2 cages available.
Okay.
But
How
but
was the
not all-
throws
not all
competition
seated
conducted?
throwing events have to be thrown from a cage. Only the
Yeah.
discus and the club throw are thrown from a cage.
Right.
The javelin and shot put are thrown open, and so
Yeah.
they can be thrown at the same time as a discus or a club throw, depending on the classification of the athletes.
Okay, now how was the event conducted? Did they strap them in, give them 3 throws? And I'm thinking, obviously, the seated throwers. You give them 3 throws, determine who makes the final, and then go to that final 8, the way we did it in Toronto?
No, they got 6 throws always.
Oh, okay.
But
So they-
that was also because of the field size. And Louise doesn't know this, but that's going to be one of the new rules, that regardless of the field size, everybody gets 6 consecutive throws,
Oh, okay.
because it does take a long time to secure the throwing frame and get the athlete in the chair, in the throwing frame.
I won't disagree with that at all. When we did it in Toronto, it was really time consuming to get them in for 3, take them out, and then bring them in again. It doubled the length of time for the event.
Yes, it does.
And David,
There
was
was-
there a lot of lifting called in this event or not?
No more
in-
than that. There was
Sure.
lifting, but it wasn't like, oh my God, there was lifting. I mean, yeah.
Yeah,
It was mainly, I mean,
the current
it
rule.
all
on
boiled
the-
down, right?
Go, Louise.
That's it. It all boils down to strapping, right? If you're strapped down properly, it's virtually impossible to lift, right? So the ones that didn't have the strapping in place, yeah, there was some lifting.
And was
But
it
it was-
called?
Oh, yes.
Okay,
And my comment was going to be that I think the rule should be called loss of contact, because one part of the rule that many people don't recognize is that if the knee slides forward and loses contact with the seat, then it is also a lifting violation. And
yeah,
should
there's
be
2
called-
parts to that.
Yeah,
And we did
And-
have a few of those, of the knees losing contact.
Yeah, because they can slide forward in the chair or on the platform or whatever you want to call it.
Yep.
And Dave, when you said that some of the measurements were not accurate, I think if I got my information correct from Jane, they were using electronic measurement in the throws. They didn't use that in the paras?
well, they did use that, but it was where they were spotted or marked, and the prism was put into the grass. That was the problem. It was an official's problem, not a
Okay.
measurement problem.
All right, thank you. I'm done.
Daryl, just to clarify for everybody on that point, I believe at the Paralympics, they used EDM, which requires a prism to be placed.
Right.
At the Olympics, for the first time ever, shot put was measured by VDM, video measuring. And therefore, there is no official out in the sector placing a prism where it lands. The video picks that up, similar to photo finish. And they have been using it for horizontal jumps for, well, a number of years. And this, they have been testing it in previous world championships, but it hasn't been the official measuring device. This in Tokyo 2020, it was the first time in shot put that it was actually the official measuring device.
Yeah, I realize that, and because I remember I sent you an email asking about those little gray plaques that were along the sector lines. Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions for David or Louise? Don't be shy if you've got any questions about the Paralympics. They're the two to ask. We are saving the Olympics, reflections from the Olympics for our next meeting together. So it will not be commented on other than the few comments we've made so far. But we have Louise and David with us tonight. If you have any questions about field or track, they're the ones to ask.
And maybe as a bit of a teaser for a potential course, for seated throwing, there's always 4 things that you look at. So the first thing you look at is throwing technique. The second thing is if they're using a holding bar, whether the holding bar is moving too much. And it's important to note that it's not normally the holding bar that moves, but sometimes the platform that the chair is strapped to sometimes will move. So there's sometimes a bit of an optical illusion. So those are 3. And the 4th issue is whether or not they can tap out like an ambulant shot putter might tap the toe board. If the athlete touches the strapping outside the circle, that's the equivalent of a tap out.
David, can you hear me?
Yes,
Okay, it's Alicia.
yes.
Besides the marking, the poor marking that you mentioned, how do you evaluate the competency of the officials?
Well, there was one official who seemed to be the boss, who was telling the officials where to put those marks. And when the boss wasn't around, the marking did get better. So that was probably the issue, was who was telling whom where to spot the throw or the landing.
But
In one of Louise's pictures, she had an image of an official who happens to be from Italy. His name is Roberto Sorrentino, and he was assigned to be in the landing area for one event, and he was particularly good at spotting where the landing was supposed to be. He wasn't an NTO, he was an ITO, so he was there simply to spot and make sure they got it right.
okay, okay. So besides the marking, I was thinking about overall. What was
I'm sorry, I missed that, Alicia.
I'm saying besides the marking, the poor marking.
Yeah, there were a few cases where officials asked us to determine whether or not there was loss of contact or lifting, but we didn't have very many of those this time, as we've had in the past.
Okay, another question. The chair that you showed that had the jointed frame, handlebar. How did you think that got inspection?
I'm sorry, I missed that question completely.
The chair that with the jointed handlebar, with the 2 joints.
Yes,
How
it was deemed by the technical delegate to be okay. In my mind, it defies the rules, but that's what the technical delegate said. So we basically do what the technical delegate says. Louise, do you have a comment on that?
Can I plead the Fifth Amendment?
Yes.
Oh, we don't have a Fifth Amendment.
It was my picture, so you don't have to comment on it.
So I do have a couple comments. One was about landing area, because most of the time I was out in the landing area. And in my opinion, any of the events that I observed, the marking seemed okay. The only issues that I ever saw was they struggled some of the times doing flats for javelins. There was a few times where like, no, that was a flat, easily. And they seem to be missing that.
And you're
Technical
correct.
delegate was also a very, well, I think more forgiving by the end. We had two incidences where the throwing frame got lost in transport. And the first incident was closer to the beginning, and the technical delegate was, sorry, that chair doesn't show up, he's out, he can't compete. And we wanted to change the order. And then I think the chair by miraculously did arrive in time. The second incident, the chair, of course it would have had to been the second athlete, his chair wasn't there. And so we did get permission to do out of order. And so he threw last, and so his chair was there in time. So again, it's his call, but in my opinion, he was doing stuff that made it fair.
And just to comment on Louise's statement about the javelin, she's right. There was a lot of struggle with calling flat throws in the javelin. But the poor marking was not so much in the javelin, but in the discus for both ambulatory and seated athletes.
Are there any other questions or comments for Louise or David? If there are no further questions, I would like to thank both Louise and David very, very much for preparing a presentation and for taking the time to share it with us this evening. Once again, we're very, very fortunate to have two experts in Paralympics in our country. And it's great to be able to learn from them. So Louise, David, thank you very, very much for being with us tonight. And just for the group, we would like to meet again, but it's the end of October right now. And if we meet in a couple of months, that's the end of December, which is the middle of the Christmas break. So I suggest we wait till the new year and possibly meet on Tuesday, January 18th. And at that point in time, we can go over some of the able-bodied Olympic reflections. And then if you've got any questions or concerns or suggestions for topics to cover, you can contact Daryl Snyder or myself at any point in time, and we will make a list and make sure that we cover the topics or areas that you would like to deal with. And you've heard that David has offered to do a seated throws presentation, so we'll keep that on the docket as well. But I'd like to thank everybody for attending and joining with us tonight. And Daryl, do you have any parting comments?
No, I just wanted to thank Louise and David myself. That was very nice of you to come over, and we'll probably see it again tomorrow night, I think. But thanks a lot, and we'll see everybody in January.
Have a good evening, everybody. Once again, thank you very much for joining us, and stay safe and stay healthy.